You are listening to the ERP, Organizational Change Journal, a podcast brought to you by Nestle and Associates.
Paul, if you don't mind, let's pick on chapter 1. And I know we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I just really love the topic and I find it to be quite fascinating. But I also think there's a lot to be learned here and a lot that we can apply to the field, right, to the practice. And so you'd mentioned in your chapter 1 this idea of failed change. Actually, the title is called Failed Change, the Greatest Preventable Cost to Business.
Isn't that a possibility, right? I mean,
that's a significant possibility. But Paul, you also discuss in that chapter change leadership and the human science. And so what can you tell me and what can you tell our listeners? What can human science tell us about issues of failed organizational change and how it can be prevented?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the guy, I have a quote in the book as I was researching it. I found a quote from first dean of the Harvard Business School. And I think that was 100 years ago, might have been 110 years ago now. And his name's escaping me. And he said something like, business is effectively a human enterprise, and the business leader needs to understand human behavior. Yeah. And what's really interesting, when we got into the pandemic in 2020, I was listening to senators and governors and mayors talking about behavioral change and behavioral science. Why? Because they wanted to change habits. And so I listened to leaders talking about how we change people's habits. And it's a fascinating thing because it was an example to me of just what that astute gentleman from the Harvard Business Review saying 110 years ago, something like that. Human business is a human enterprise. We need to understand human business in order to be an effective human behavior, in order to be an effective leader. So the question is, if you grow up, if you do an MBA, for example, how much of that, an MBA, is focused on the human side of business? Did you do an MBA in the dark days back there? Or do you go good? And you probably didn't, right? You probably didn't have time. You were too busy. But if you look at the curriculum, if you pull up the Harvard Business Review, I think they had 110 electives. There were only very few. And I think there were none on change. And it seemed to me there were one on leadership. Now, this is an incredible disconnect for me, is we're teaching business leaders about strategy and marketing and finance and accounting and economics and all of those, fascinating and interesting and valuable parts of the curriculum of a master's in business administration. But how much are we teaching them to lead? Yeah. And that was the question as I looked at the curriculum. If you take someone out of an MBA, right, how well equipped are they to actually lead human beings? Mm-hmm. They may know marketing exceptionally well. They may be an expert in finance and accounting exceptionally well. They may be a highly trained economist. They may be a very exceptionally strong strategist. But can they lead a team of human beings to produce incredible results? And I was left with the answer, probably not. If they were a good leader to begin with, then they'll probably be, a good sort of natural leader to begin with, then they'll probably do a reasonable job at it. But I remember when I was a young director of a bank in the 80s, how I learned leadership. I had a team of 10 people working for me, when I was 23 years old or something like that. I knew nothing about management and leadership. I was brought up as a scientist. I was making it up as I go along. And what I used to do was watch the other people around me to take my cues and my leadership learning from what they were doing. But who taught them? It's kind of like 13-year-olds talking about sex. Who's to say that the people that I was following and that I was taking my leadership lessons from were any good to begin with anyway? So that's the way I learned leadership, was in a sense by watching the people around me. And I did some things right, but, I did many things awfully wrong as well. So I didn't have any formal education in leadership. So, and that's the problem we face in the world. I think there's so much ink spilled on the need for better leadership in the world, more moral leadership, better ethical leadership, more human-centered leadership in the world. And I don't think we've solved the problem of how to do that well. It's certainly you don't learn in high school.
And Paul, I love that topic. Man, we need to have you back on because to talk about a couple of topics. But no, the article that I'm actually working on is, it's exactly that, is, a lot of leaderships learn through School of Hard Knocks, right? You get punched around a little bit, you're going to learn a little bit about leadership. And they learn through maybe some anecdotal, observation or evidence of other people and maybe a mentor and through some observation. But so far today, and really the premise of your work and your book is really based on, a lot of science-based approach. What's science-based evidence? What does it tell us? And, when you look at the field of leadership, and there are so many leadership styles and approaches. I mean, we mentioned just a couple with servant leadership and authentic leadership and transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And, I think one thing for me is it is about educating leaders, and there's phenomenal leaders, right? I mean, clearly traits has a lot to do with it, your skills, how much you got beat up in the past and learn from it, but I think a large part is if they don't get that training through an MBA or through school, then it really starts with reflection, does it not, as a leader, and really trying to understand and say, no, I think there is value in what, maybe what research has to say to us and what research-based evidence has to tell us. And to be able to take that and apply that to your world and really kind of contemplate, I think is really probably a number one step in improving leadership, as an individual.
Yeah, and improving our world. I mean, the mantra of the consulting firm I forwarded was, better leaders for better businesses for a better planet.
Yeah,
that was the context where I work. I mean, we're playing a big game, and reinventing leadership from the models we inherited from the church and the military is going to be. It'll take 100 years. I mean, old ideas die hard. I mean, one interesting thing that I focused on was on risk. I mean, we're frequently taking risks in organizations. And one of the science-based ideas on leadership is you need to understand how people respond, human beings respond when the pressure goes up. Do they take more risk or do they take less risk? There's an interesting thing called the sunk cost fallacy. I think you and your readers will be familiar with it. It's like, if you've invested a ton of money in something, is that a justification for keep doing it? So we'll take the Vietnam War, for example, as one of the sort of OG examples of the sunk cost fallacy. And it's something called escalation of commitment, is you get yourself in deep. And it looks to you as a leader like the only way out is to get yourself in deeper. So if we leave now, we leave all this money on the table. We leave, in the very macabre answer of the Vietnam War, we've got dead buddies. We've got parents at home. We've lost children or something like that. How do we look if we leave now? And the answer to the question is, well, it's an important question, but it's not the right question, because sadly, the money's not coming back. And I think the question is now renewing our investment in a failed investment. And that could be a failed project. That could be a failed acquisition. That could be a failed implementation or something like that. Do we double down?
Yeah.
Or do we retreat? And how do you make that decision? Is a vital decision. Free of bias, free of cognitive bias. Because, we all know, if we look at your investments on Charles Schwab or wherever you manage your investment portfolio or something like that, if you've got something that's losing, you say you've lost half your money in it, and you think, oh, well, I can't possibly sell. I've lost. Well, that's not the right question. It's how much you've lost. The question is, where's it going tomorrow? And you may have lost whatever you've lost. I feel sorry for you. Boo-hoo. But the question is like, how much do you let those losses, those bad decisions, inform your future decisions? And so these are the things I think leadership should be attuned to, is because on a leadership team, say I'm a chief executive and say I've got something where the train is taking a dirt road or something like that. My team, in making their recommendations to me and in discussing what to do next, are going to be full of these biases that we're talking about, the sunk cost bias, the escalation of commitment bias. And what do you need to, you need to know that that's the way they're thinking about this. And you need to be the sort of leader that can say, hey, understands enough about things like this to say, all right, do we double down here or is it time to retrench?